Good morning, Harris County, and welcome to our Thursday edition of the Homegrown Lecture Series. It is 10 a.m., and I am glad that you are with us. This program is brought to you by the Ag and Natural Resources team of Texas A&M AgriLife Extension here in Harris County. Today's talk will be Pig Out, Know Your Pork, brought to you by Mr. Shannon Dietz, who is our Ag and Natural Resources agent. Just a reminder for what we got covered coming up the rest of the month. Cool Kid Plant Projects will be next week by Brandy Keller. Food Safety will be presented by Amanda Cripple, who is our Family and Community Health agent. And then on the 29th, we will have Wild Garden Tips, again brought to you by Brandy Keller. So just a few items. Make sure your microphones are on mute. Please turn off your video cameras if they are on. This will help with bandwidth. This is being recorded, so you will receive a link with a survey along with the link to the video if you want to watch it again later on. And we do appreciate you taking the time to complete those surveys because it helps us in planning future programs. So without any further ado, I am going to pass this over to Mr. Shannon Dietz for Pig Out, Know Your Pork. Shannon, all yours. Unmute your mic, Shannon.
You think I
We
would have
got you
learned by
now.
now? Um, Good morning, everyone. My name is Shannon Dietz. I'm County Extension Ag Agent, like Paul said, Agriculture and Natural Resources for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension based here in Harris County. And we're going to have some fun today talking about pork. And we're going to pig out. I wish I would have found one of those little pig snouts that I've seen that people use and everything. That would have been a good thing to have to share with my presentation this morning, but I couldn't find one. So we'll have to try it for next time. But for those of you who were on the video last month, we talked about beef. And we had some really good feedback on that, and people wanted some information about pork this time. So I was glad to oblige with that suggestion. And, I know that Texas is beef country, and we're never going to say anything bad about beef or anything, but we do want to talk to you about options out there as far as like with the meat industry and so forth. So, pork is another viable option for many families to choose. And, with that being said, a lot of people probably don't realize the importance or the significance of pork in people's diet around the world. Not only is it important here in the United States, but particularly around the world. And it is actually the most popular meat consumed around the world. And if you look at my graphic here on the next slide, you'll see that there's three different, or actually four, but three different categories: beef and veal, pork, and poultry. And the pork is actually in the shaded purple area. And pork actually almost doubles the amount of consumption between what the poultry industry and the beef industry has. And that's going to attributes a lot to the consciousness of the nutritional and the daily intake from American Heart Association and different health associations like that. Breeders have come a long way in producing a type of stock that is very well accepted by the consumer these days. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the slides to come and everything like that. But I think it's really interesting to know that, over 102 million metric tons of uh, pork is consumed every year. And that was based on a 2010 survey. So being in 2020, you can see that it's probably increased significantly with that. We're going to talk about some of the top pork items, and we're going to go through a lot of different information today. We're going to talk about different cuts of pork. We're going to talk about some pork vocabulary, and we're going to talk about different ways you can cook some different cuts of meat that you might not be aware of, and so forth. And then one of my favorite things is a little surprise for you at the very end. I'm going to share a couple recipes with you. So if you're interested in cooking and using the pork meat that we talk about in the slide presentation today for your family and so forth like that, we're going to be talking about that, and hopefully you're able to take advantage of those. So we're also going to be including some information from some of my original, the area that I originally come from, which is Southwest Louisiana. So pork is very important in that area. And so I'm going to be sharing some information and some little stories with you as we go through on that. Top pork items. I'm sure a lot of you can probably pick or guess what the top pork item might be. And that's usually on the top of everybody's list. Bacon, 65% popularity among consumers as what bacon usually attributes to. Sausage, 56%. And keep in mind that there are a variety of sausages out there. There aren't there are a lot more sausages than what you see in the meat cases at your local retail stores and so forth like that. We have a lot of um, butcher shops and a lot more meat markets that are popping up around the areas that at one time were really popular back in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, where people would go and get their primary cuts of meat and beef and pork and chicken and so forth from their specialty meats, their sausages, their beef tongue, different things like that. So those are really making a resurgence and so forth. So keep that in mind, that you'll be able to find a lot of these items not only in the retail cuts or the retail markets and so forth like that, but also at the specialty shops. So going down the list, we have ham, another favorite, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit later on. Ribs, I think everybody can agree to that. I kind of thought that one would have been a little bit higher with the popularity of ribs. We will be talking about the different types of ribs. Obviously, there are, not sure how many of you know this, but there are many different types of ribs that you can choose to cook from the hog. And we're going to go through those a little bit later on. Pork chops, one of my favorite all-time foods. I love the bone-in pork chop, and that ranks pretty high. Tenderloin, very high as well. Prosciutto, shredded pork, pork roast, another one of my favorites. Pulled pork, shredded pork and pulled pork, pretty there, and what they both do. Barbecue pork, obviously here in Texas, we love to barbecue everything. So processing and handling pork, some of the things that we want to talk about before we get started with the primal cuts and getting into how the cooking methods are. We want to talk a little bit about what you need to do and what you need to be prepared for when dealing with pork. The first thing is what is done. So internal temperature you want to look for is about 145 degrees. At 145 degrees, when you cook your pork, if you take it out and you let it rest for another 3 minutes, that is the ideal temperature whenever the pork should be done. That is the minimum. If you want to go for a well done pork, at 160 degrees is at the point where definitely all organisms are going to be killed. You're depending on what type of cooking method you're going to be using, you might want to be careful, because at that 160 point, pork, if it doesn't have a lot of marbling in it, especially like pork chops, your tenderloins, stuff with not a lot of fat content in it that is very lean is going to tend to dry out very quickly. So you want to be careful with that. Cooking dry or wet, and we're talking about here basically whether you're going to be cooking it on the grill or on the barbecue, on the smoker. Those are popular methods there, as opposed to if you're going to be braising it or cooking it in a gravy or a stew. So some of your tougher cuts of meat, where you're going to want to cut down like your stew meat and so forth, cut them up into cube pieces of meat and so forth. You're going to want to cook those down in a gravy, slow cook over a couple of hours. Break that tissue down. It's going to turn into real tender meat and so forth. So that's the difference between cooking dry or wet. Foodborne organisms. We're talking um, mainly about trichinosis. A lot of people were always really worried about like cooking pork and having that undercooked pork and people getting sick from trichinosis. If you cook the temperature again to that 145 and use a meat thermometer, if you don't have a meat thermometer, whether you're grilling or barbecuing or just cooking on a stove top or oven, please make the investment of using or buying a really good meat thermometer. It will be very helpful to you. It really the old ways of like cutting it and checking for the piece of meat on the inside to see if it's pink or it's white or anything like that. When you do that, you open it up, the juices escape, the meat becomes dry at that point and so forth, as opposed to just inserting the needle for the meat thermometer to determine what the temperature is. So again, cooking it to that 145 takes care of all those foodborne organisms, especially trichinosis. And we've come a long way. The breeders and the producers and so forth, they're actually breeding better hogs, better stock. And so we don't really run into that organism a lot, much more these days and so forth. So that's a good thing. Defrosting. There's a couple different methods that you can use for defrosting pork. Um, One would be running it under water in a sink filled with water. Not the preferred method, but if you need something quick and you forgot to take it out of the oven or the freezer, you can do that for a small piece of meat or so forth like that. If you know you're going to be cooking pork in the future, you definitely take it out of the freezer and put it in the refrigerator to defrost properly for 3 or 4 days, and keep it that way. That way you don't have any organisms getting into that meat from being too warm or anything like that. And then a last method would be the defrost method in the microwave. Again, if you do it that way, you're going to definitely want to cook the meat right away, because with that heating process, there's always the chance of having those microorganisms enter the meat that way, and you definitely don't want that to stay over a day or two where they can develop and multiply there. Um, Raw handling of pork, you're definitely going to want to, I forgot what my note was on that. Um, when dealing with raw pork, keep it refrigerated below 41 degrees Fahrenheit, and cook it or freeze it to 0 degrees Fahrenheit within 3 to 5 days. It's not necessary to rinse pork or anything like that before you use it. Mind that. Um, so those are a couple different things there. Next, we're going to move on to nutritional value. Um, in 1987, the National Pork Board started a campaign with pork, and I'm sure a lot of you still remember it. It's called the other white meat, and it's still kind of around. You don't hear it as much anymore, but it was a really big campaign that was going on at the time. And like I said, it is still out there. They still have logos out there and so forth. And basically, what that meant was the pork industry was comparing their meat to the poultry industry, because for a while the poultry industry was really hands above the rest for getting nutritional value out there for people who didn't want to have a high calorie diet. They didn't want to have a lot of fat in their food or their meat that they were cooking. Chicken cooked without the skin and so forth like that. Your chicken breasts and everything were very lean. And so poultry was known for that for quite a few years. With the development of better breeds of hogs, um, the pork board actually has been able to work with several uh, like oh, I can't remember the name of it right now, food councils and so forth like that, where the tenderloin piece of meat is actually, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, is actually leaner or as lean as a piece of chicken and in calorie wise and so forth. So it also provides a lot of nutritious nutrition and provides nutrients and vitamins. We talk about some of the things here. A 3-ounce serving includes amount of phosphorus, 54% thiamine, 30% niacin, 19% riboflavin. That phosphorus, I'm going to refer to my notes here because I keep getting them mixed up sometimes. The phosphorus is beneficial because it strengthens bones and generates energy in the cells. So that's a very important one there. Your thiamine, where it contributes 54%. Without this key vitamin, metabolism of carbohydrates, protein, and fat would be significantly compromised. Animal protein is one of the best sources of this nutrient, and among choices, pork is tops. So you can see that's another good reason there why people are moving towards pork, including more pork in their diet and so forth. Your niacin, this is important for the function of many enzymes in the body involved in the metabolism of sugars and fatty acids. And riboflavin, that kind of rivals the amount of the serving has an important role in the release of energy from the foods and so forth. So it rivals the amount of milk that riboflavin has in that. The next slide, guys, we're talking about 24 grams of protein from a 3-ounce serving of pork. Pork loin, you can see up at the top, pork loin, pork sirloin, and pork tenderloin. Each one of those, a 3-ounce serving of those, is basically your pork sirloin is going to be at the highest at 173 calories. But each one of those is basically going to be under 200 calories, and you get 24 grams of protein. Compared to other products, you would need to eat 6 tablespoons of peanut butter to get that 24 grams of protein. But then at the same time, you would be ingesting 564 calories into your body. 6.5 cups of broccoli. Definitely, if you want a lot of fiber in your diet, you can definitely get it that way. But who is going to eat 6.5 cups of broccoli? That would be around 176 calories to get 24 grams of protein. 4 hard-boiled eggs, 312 calories to get 24 grams of protein. So you can see definitely a 3-ounce serving of pork goes a long way with fewer amount of calories in getting the most amount of protein for your buck. The next thing we're going to talk about, we're going to get into is retail cuts of pork. Pork is like beef. They're divided into the sections called Primal Cuts. We talked about Primal Cuts last month when we talked about beef. And you can see the little graphic down at the bottom. It kind of gives you an idea, but there's going to be a slide talking a little bit more about Primal Cuts. These Primal Cuts are then broken down into individual retail cuts, which you find at your grocery meat counters. So this is where we're going to be talking about. These are some of the items that you're more than likely going to see or have seen at your meat counters. Spare ribs, bacon, ground pork, your Boston butt, your blade steaks, your country ribs, your pork chops, your tenderloins, smoked hams, bone-in hams, back ribs, and so forth. So these are probably all items that are very familiar to you and that you've seen in the meat section of your grocery store. So what we're going to do now is we're going to break those down And we're going to tell you where on the animal those particular cuts come from. If you look at, and this is what explaining, we're talking about the primal cuts of pork, and we'll start across the top. We have the butt, which is kind of weird because you would think the butt would be on the rear of the animal because of the wording of it, but it's actually on the shoulder part of the hog, and that is up in the front next to the jowl right behind the neck. Then you have the loin, goes across the back. That's where you're going to get your tenderloin, your pork chops, um, your part of your ribs from, and so forth like that. That is going to be the most tenderest cuts of pork that you're going to get from the animal in that area. Your ham makes up about 25% of the animal on the back part. That is including the leg, obviously. And then we go across underneath the underbelly. Your belly, you 16%. That's where you're going to get your bacon and your bacon primarily. Your spare ribs, that's where you're going to get those spare ribs, your other different kind of ribs that we're going to go through in a little bit, and then your picnic up towards the front again. The picnic and the butt or the shoulder are very similar in each area. They're very, the muscles in those particular areas have worked a lot, just like in the beef cattle. The muscles that are tend to be worked a lot on a particular animal are going to be the toughest. They're going to have a lot of muscle tissue in those. Those are going to take longer to cook and break down. So those are going to be cooking methods that you're going to want to either cut into smaller sections, and you're going to want to cook down into gravies, stews, braising, and so forth, and different things like that. So next we're going to go over a couple of terms in pork vocabulary. I think that's going to be interesting for you to kind of grasp what we're going to be talking about a little bit later on in the presentation and just going forward. The first thing is bone-in ham. This is a ham product in which all four leg bone sections remain and all muscles remain connected. So obviously, whenever you go to the store and you're looking for a ham, there are many different types of hams that you can choose from. You can get the bone-in, you can get the boneless ham, you can get the spiral ham, you can get a picnic ham. There are many different varieties. So the bone-in ham is usually one that is going to be cooked best when it tends to be boiled. One of the ways that I like it is boiled with beef stock or chicken stock, and or if you don't have either one of those, a big pot of water with some heads of cabbage, potatoes, and carrots, and it makes a really good meal once you take it out and slice it up. So it does take a while to cook, again, because that ham does have a lot of muscle tissue in it and so forth. The Boston butt, we're talking about the upper part of the pork shoulder. That's a real popular cut for a roast. You can also get Boston butt sliced into steaks. Boudin, we talked a little bit about me being from South Louisiana. I'm not sure if anybody in here has heard of it before. I'm sure some of you probably have. The correct terminology of it is boudin. It's not boudin or anything like that. It is a South Louisiana favorite. It's one of my favorites. It's come a long way. It's been around in South Louisiana for hundreds of years. The early settlers originally made it with casings of the intestines of the pig, and it's a mixture of pork trimmings and a variety of seasonings, green onions, and rice. And it's almost like a sausage version, but it has rice in it. And then it's put through a grinder and it's stuffed back in the casing. And it can be either steamed, it can be barbecued, and it's really good. So if you see it in the grocery stores, there's a lot of different varieties out there. I'm not going to tell you which variety or which product to get. I don't particularly care for any of them in this area. You might want to try some at some of the more local meat that you might find better than some of the big supply chain stores. Boucherie, It's a tradition in South Louisiana where a whole hog is butchered, cut into pork cuts. You'll see that top picture with everybody along the table. Boucherie usually happens in the late fall or early winter in South Louisiana. Usually a couple hogs are raised on the farm specifically for butchering for the fall or the winter, so that though, and usually a couple of families will get together. They will use all the parts of the pig, and they will have a big day of it. It's a really neat family gathering. It's a, like I said, it's a really good tradition in South Louisiana, and that's just kind of a picture of, you see several people going through making different cuts of the pig and so forth, and it's pronounced boucherie. Curing. This is a process which is injected or rubbed meat with special ingredients. In the case of a ham, if you've seen hams in the stores, usually around the holidays, that have a pretty pink, rich color. It gives us a unique flavor. Those are going to be cured, and it's usually going to say that on the packaging. Okay, so if you're looking specifically for a cured ham as opposed to just a regular raw ham, it will say that on the packaging. So just be aware whenever you're buying stuff to make sure that you read the packaging and then to know what you're getting. The next thing is cracklings or gratons. This is another South Louisiana favorite, and this is the picture on the bottom. Remember, we talked about all the different things that are used from the pig. This comes from the pork belly. This is also what you would use for cooked bacon, but bacon is actually the smoked or the cured pieces of pork belly. Actually, the pork belly is just cut up in the little squares and is deep fried. Used to be fried in hog lard. Now it's fried in more healthy, I guess, if you will, fats and so forth. Not your saturated fats or trans-saturated fats and so forth like that. So it is really good. It has a really good crunch to it. It has a layer of fat that's really, really crisp, and it also has a layer of meat that's attached to it as well. So another favorite of South Louisiana. Smoking. This is the use of wood smoke and heat in some form to flavor or color meat such as bacon. If you will go out, probably, I'm sure, to some of the more rural areas of Texas, I know you'll find them in Louisiana as well. There are probably smokehouses out on the rural landscape that people use on a yearly basis whenever they do butcher, that they are intended just for smoking purposes, usually wood structures. And you usually see a pile of either pecan wood or oak wood or any type of flavored smoked wood that will, whenever they're lit, you're not creating a fire, you're actually just creating a smoke, and that heat will actually absorb into the meat and will cook it, and the flavors of that smoke will be absorbed into the meat. And that happens not only with your sausages and your bacons, but also with other meats. You can do the same thing with jerky and stuff as well. Couple more. Stewing. We talked about this is one of the methods, a wet method. We talked about the dry and the wet methods and so forth. Stewing is for smaller pieces, less tender cuts, such as shoulder cubes. Sauteing, which is cooking down for small pork cuts, used a lot in chops, cuts, and strips. And then the last one is sausage. Again, there are different types of sausage out there, but sausage basically made of trimmings of cut pork, ground, stuffed in casings, and smoked. And it really, really adds a good flavor to if you've ever had a gumbo before, and you add smoked sausage or smoked andouille. Andouille is just smoked meat, and that's another thing that we could talk about later on and so forth like that. So you can find andouille in the grocery store, usually in the specialty section, like around the Canadian bacon and stuff like that. So if you ever want to cook with that, that gives a great taste as well. So getting into our meats, guys, we're going to talk about some different cuts. And the first one we're going to talk about, we've already mentioned a couple of times, the pork butt, or also known as the Boston butt. you can get this boneless or bone in. A lot of times you can get it as, most of the time you can get it as a roast, or you can get it cut up into steaks. Barbecued pork steaks from the Boston Butt are really, really good. They have a lot of marbling in them. Obviously, you can see the amount of fat there. When cooking on a grill or a smoker or anything like that, that fat breaks down. It adds natural flavor to the meat. Obviously, if you want to be a little bit more healthier, you can trim some of that outside fat off where it's not as predominant and so forth. But it is a heavy muscled meat, so it does take a while to cook down and so forth. Has a lot of great flavor, so don't rule out the Boston butt. Picnic shoulder, this is right below the butt area. So the meat from this area is gonna all be the same. You see two pictures there. Again, there's a shoulder and a shoulder steak or a blade steak. Again, just like with the Boston butt, you can either get it as a roast or you can get it as a steak. So sometimes you will see it if you go to a butcher and you buy a roast and you really want it as steaks, you can ask them to cut it into steaks for you. It is again moderately tough because it does come from that forearm. There's a lot of exercise there with the hogs, obviously working, walking all the time and so forth. So this is good in stews, making ground pork and sausage. You can actually make ground pork from any pieces of meat on the hog if you choose to do so, but the ground pork is going to come better from those areas that you're going to have that marbling in it, that fat content in it, because if you choose areas like your tenderloin or your pork chops or your boneless pork chops that has no fat content and they're very lean, that is going to tend to dry out quite a bit. So you definitely want to go with something that's going to have some fat or marbling in it for ground pork. Pork loin, this is the area on the back side or the top back. And a little interesting note here, hogs are bred to have up to 17 ribs, unlike beef and lamb, which only have 13. So sometimes when you're at a restaurant and so forth, and you'll get an order of baby back ribs or spare ribs or whatever, you'll notice that that rib rack is a lot bigger if you would order, a beef rib or or what have you or anything like that. So again, that's something that the producers are working on, and there are different types of ribs that you can get. There's the country style ribs, there or the St. Louis style ribs, there or the baby back ribs, and so forth. So another interesting thing about the ribs is make sure that whenever you go to cook the ribs, especially like those that are on a rack, there's a fine membrane on the back of the ribs, and that needs to be taken off before you do any smoking or baking or anything, because if you leave it on, it will leave a taste with the ribs. So it's very easy to take off. Basically, all you're doing is taking a sharp knife on the back side, not the meaty side of the rib, but the back side, taking that sharp knife and sticking it under a lip it, right, grazing it along the breast, that meat bone, and then you will see a little piece of film almost come up, and then you can take it by your hand and pull it almost in one piece. So I might do a demonstration on that one time to kind of help with if you've never done that before, you definitely want to remove that before cooking anything like that. Your entire loin, it can be cut into chops or cutlets, or you can keep it whole, like you see the picture there with the string attached to it. Cook a pork loin roast, and that can be stuffed. You can do that. Tenderloin comes from the rear end of the pork loin, and we talked a little bit about the baby back ribs. Those come from the upper rib cage, and then so we have a full rack of ribs down at the bottom, still with that pork fat on the outside. Those are going to be more St. Louis style ribs. Those are more rectangular style. Those have been trimmed with the edges cut off. So depending on which type of rib you're going for, if you're going for a larger version of the ribs, you're going to go for like a St. Louis style rib as opposed to like a baby back rib, which is a smaller portion of rib, but you're going to still have a medium amount on it, but you can feed more people with like a St. Louis style rib and so forth. So just keep that in mind. Ham, very good. Everybody loves ham, especially with the holidays coming up, especially with Christmas. They're very popular around Easter time. It does come from the back leg of the hog. It can be fresh, smoked, or cured. You can see that, and you can also have steaks cut from the ham as well. So again, just like with the ground pork, you can basically have ground pork cut from any portion of the hog. You can also have pretty much steaks cut from any portion of the hog as well. Interesting fact is that prosciutto is made from the hams that are cured, smoked, and then air dried. Prosciutto is that real thin sliced. Italy is very known for it. You see it in the specialty areas of the food market, usually around like the entertaining section and so forth like that. It's usually sold in the little plastic containers, and it's sold in very fine, thin strips and so forth. Excuse me. Ham hocks, we talked a little bit about that. Very popular in Southern cuisine, and that is from the joint of the shank end of the ham where it joins the foot. And so those are all popular portions of meat that come from the ham area. Pork side or the pork belly, we talked a little bit about that already. And again, that was our number one choice for consumers, which was bacon. And an interesting fact about bacon, so bacon is going to be cooked or sold by the pound, and it is going to be determined whether, so if it's a thin sliced bacon, there are going to be more slices, obviously, in the bacon pack to make up that pound. Or if you're a lot of bacon now going to the thick cut bacon, you're going to have, whereas opposed to if you're having a thinner cut bacon, you might have 20 to 25 slices of bacon per pound of bacon per package, whereas the thick cut bacon, you might only have 12 to 15 slices because you're talking about thicker slices of bacon taking up more weight and so forth to make up that pound. So keep that in mind. It's something you want to take a look at. If you're a fan of the thick cut bacon, like I am, you're not going to get as much for the pound, but you're going to get more meat and on each individual slice of bacon. One of the things that I really noticed about bacon a lot lately is people have different methods of cooking bacon. We grew up kind of type thing with my mom always cooking bacon on the stovetop, and it was gotten to be really messy because of the popping and the grease popping everywhere. And it was good to eat, but it was really bad for her to clean up afterwards and so forth and everything. So she eventually started moving to using the oven method, which was a lot better. So you weren't more of in a controlled environment like with the oven, so you didn't have as much spatter on popping oil on your arms and so forth where it was cooking in the oven. And she could put aluminum foil down at the bottom of the pan, and it kind of cleaned up a little bit easier and so forth. One of the things I've learned a lot lately is using the air fryer for the bacon, cooking bacon. I will get a pack of bacon and I will cut it in half, and I will put it in the air fryer for about 400 degrees on 10 minutes, and it cooks a really good crispy bacon just the way I like it. So if you haven't used the air fryer yet for your bacon and you have an air fryer, you might want to experiment with that. Again, it's going to be a personal choice whether you like your bacon crispy or if you like your bacon a little chewy or so. If I would suggest that you try that with the air fryer. The bottom picture here on the slide is the picture of the pork belly. Again, that is bacon that has been unsmoked or uncured. So, and it has just been unsliced. So, and bacon, the pork belly can also come rolled up at the top and cooked that away. Pork belly has become really, really popular. Recently, I've noticed in a lot of Chinese dishes, crispy pork belly and so forth. There's a lot of recipes that are out there for that. I haven't tried it yet, but it really looks really, really good. It's kind of like a mixture of a crackling with meat on it and so forth. So if you know of any good Chinese restaurants around the Houston area that serve good crispy pork belly, feel free to leave those comments in the food the question section, and we'll get to it. Pork spare ribs comes from the side of the belly. And these are often grilled. Usually your spare ribs are going to come two to a pack. They are very economical recently. You'll find them whenever they go on sale a lot at the grocery stores. So keep an eye out for that. They bake really, really well. Another way of cooking the ribs, if you have, I talked about the air fryer, but if you also have an Instapot, I haven't tried the ribs in my Instapot yet, but have people that swear by them that they will cook ribs, I guess, in like about a 20-minute time frame, fall off the bone tender, as opposed to cooking them in the oven with a little bit of apple cider vinegar for some moisture. And they come out delicious. I've had them cooked that way at friends' house when we've gone that over to eat at their place before, and they've been delicious. Now, you're not going to get the browning effect of what you see there on the bottom of the picture. What you would need to do is you would need to take them out of the Instapot. They're going to be kind of like a brown, a flat brown color, but you would lay them on a pan and then coat them with your favorite barbecue sauce, pop them in the oven, probably on broil for about 5 minutes. Add that, and they'll get that nice caramelization color that you see there. And then you'll think you baked them in the oven the whole time, but it really speeds up the process. So Instapot on the ribs and the air fryer on the bacon. So let me know if you've tried any of those. So kind of wrapping up the presentation, guys, we talked a little bit about me sharing some recipes with you. And what I have here is the first recipe. Pork backbone stew, or fricassee, is a popular dish in South Louisiana. And obviously this recipe will be on the video here. So if you need a copy of this sent to you, I can definitely email it to you. But this is a family favorite of ours. My mom used to cook this dish really, really well. Since then, my mom has passed away, but my sister is an excellent cook, and I'm very grateful for that. But this one is actually cooked with a roux. So if you haven't had experience cooking with roux before, which is basically, I know there are several different types of roux out there, but roux originally started with basically oil and flour. It's a tedious process. It can easily burn on you. You have to stand at the pot and continuously stir it. There are different shades of roux, everything from a light caramel color to a dark caramel color. There are roux that you can cook in the oven. There are roux that you can buy in jars. There are plenty of different types of recipes out there. So if you've never experimented with roux before and you want to try it, keep in mind that it is going to be a tedious process and that you might not get it on the first try. If you do, you're very good. So congratulations on that. But if you do buy a roux in a jar, there are several places in Houston that you can get those. The brands that I would suggest you buy are Richards, Richaords, or Savoies, Savoies. And you can get the roux in different shades. But basically, this is a real simple recipe. A lot of the recipes that were cooked back in South Louisiana were very simple recipes. They were very hearty recipes. A lot of them included rice. and a lot of them included the ingredients that they had around the home or on the farm. They didn't have a lot of beef there at that time, but everybody pretty much had hogs because it was easier to feed hogs and so forth. So everybody had hogs. They would get together, like I said, every fall or winter and have the boucherie. And this is what one of the results of that you could have with that. It's a very simple recipe. It doesn't require a lot of different things that you need to go to the grocery store and buy. If you've never cooked pork backbone before, give it a shot. It is really, really a good piece of meat. You're probably only about to get it at some of your specialty meat markets, or maybe at like Central Market. You might be able to find it there at your meat market there if you have a good relationship with your butcher, or some of your meat markets on the outside of the Houston area. If you can't find the backbone, you can definitely use bone-in pork chops. But this is the recipe. This is cooked in a Magna-like pot. It's cooked over several hours. It's a really, really good recipe. Pork backbone stew fricassee. The next recipe that we have for you probably is a lot more common, that probably many of you have tried before: pork and sausage jambalaya. Again, this is another favorite. Again, it incorporates a lot of the things we talked about today: sausage, pork meat, rice, again, which is a common staple around here in Houston, South Louisiana, and so forth. This is a very easy recipe. Again, it doesn't call for a lot of different ingredients, a lot of stuff you might have on hand around the house and so forth. So again, either one of these recipes, if you want, let me know. I can get them to you, and they will be on the video as well. So that kind of wraps up today's presentation. Thank you for joining me today. Remember, always be as happy as a pig in a puddle of mud. My name is Shannon Dietz. I'm the County Extension Agent in Harris County. I enjoyed coming to you today and sharing some information on pork and how to cut it, or buying retail cuts of meat, how to cook it, and so forth, and making you hopefully a more conscious consumer when you're going to be out next time shopping for your family. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it back over to Paul.
Okay, Shannon. Well, great job. Appreciate all that information. I do want to thank, let's see, Joanne posted a link to a great Instapot recipe for ribs.
Awesome.
Obviously that is coming with some backing to it. So we do appreciate that. Besides that, Shannon, I think you are good. You covered a lot of information, a lot of good ideas there. And I think we are good for today. So I want to thank you all for joining us for our Pig Out Know Your Pork lecture today. Keep in mind, registration is open. And next week, we'll be back here again Thursday at 10 a.m. with Cool Kid Plant Projects and Brandy Keller. So until then, Harris County, you guys have a great week, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Shannon.